You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
I'm Bill Thomas, and you sound incredibly chipper.
I am exhausted at the end of a school day, but I'm pulling it together for our listeners so that they get the absolute best of me.
I like it. You're inspiring. You're energetic.
Yep.
You're smiling.
I'm going for it. I hope it comes through in my voice. You know, it's what we're here for. We're here to be inspirational and energetic, and we hope that everybody who listens really enjoys listening to us. We are here for you.
I hope so. Damn, you're sounding pretty convincing there, girl.
I know, right? Bill's the only person who can see the manic smile on my face, but, yeah, I'm good.
Well, you got that snack in after getting home from school, and you're good to go.
Am good to go, can confirm. So we want to make sure that we take a couple of minutes here at the top and talk about a wonderful event that Bill and I are both blessed to be able to take part in that is coming later in October, and that is a memorial for Keith Call. Bill, you want to fill us in on some details? I know you did press about this earlier today.
I did. The wonderful people from the Cumberland Historic Cemetery Organization, a guy named Ed Taylor, had reached out to the Call family, and they've put together a really wonderful program to commemorate Keith Call's life and mark its passing. And as I was talking about with a reporter earlier today, when you have missing people like Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, there's never a memorial or a funeral or something like that to mark their passing because, of course, the hope is that they'll come home someday or the doorbell will ring and there they'll be. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Unlike the rest of us in the Colonial Parkway murders who sadly ended up receiving our loved ones back, so we had their remains, and then typically there's a funeral or a memorial service or something like that. That never happens in the missing persons case, at least not typically. So when the Cumberland Historic Cemetery Organization, or CHCO, approached the Call family, Joyce Call Canada consulted with her brothers, and they thought, as a family, this is a great idea. Mm-hmm. So what they're going to do is they're going to add a beautiful commemorative stone to the family plot where the Calls are buried at Roswell Cemetery in Hayes, Virginia. And so on Saturday, October 14th at 2 p.m., there'll be an event that's open to the public. All are welcome to attend, and there'll be a dedication of this memorial stone.
I think it's going to be a wonderful event. I am looking forward to speaking, although I am generally averse to public speaking of any kind. I am perfectly fine sucking it up and dealing with it in order to do this for the Call family, because I feel like it's very worthwhile, and I'm really pleased that this is happening. And let's take a moment, indeed, to shout out Ed Taylor, who has really done the legwork on this and has made this really wonderful and moving gesture. Ed is a listener, so Ed, thank you very much from all of us, all the Colonial Parkway Murders families and us here at Mind Over Murder. We really do appreciate the work you've put into this.
Can't say enough wonderful things about Mr. Taylor and the CHCO. Mr. Taylor's going to speak. Rick Allen will be doing invocation. Our friend Blaine Pardoe, who's the author of A Special Kind of Evil, the book on the Colonial Parkway murders, will speak. I will speak. Kristin Dilley will also speak. And then Andy Fox of WAVY TV 10, who has been covering this case for 37 years, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. Will also speak, and then members of the Call family will be there. I think it's going to be a lovely event. And his two brothers, Doug and Stephen Call, are actually going to unveil this monument, which is basically an addition to the family plot for the Call family. And the hope is that someday, when Keith and Sandy's remains are recovered, and this case is solved, that Keith would be interred in the family plot. This is a nice way to acknowledge the family's loss and Keith's life. There are things you can do now with a memorial stone that you couldn't do that many years ago. So this actually incorporates a beautiful picture of Keith and a little write-up about him as a young man. I thought it was beautifully done. Everyone is welcome, and you'd be more than welcome to attend at 2 o'clock on Saturday, October 14th.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We certainly hope that we will see a number of our listeners out there if they are so inclined. We're going to get back to our third episode of Ask Us Anything because we just keep getting questions about this case, which we are so thankful for. Thank you to everyone who asks the questions and wants to know more about the case and helps to keep it alive. We appreciate it. This section is going to be the DNA and FGG, forensic genetic genealogy question section, because we had so many of them. They all do hinge around this first $64,000 question. And we're going to attribute it to Kathy Marie because she's the first person, but certainly not the last person to ask about it. So Kathy Marie asks, drumroll please, any chance DNA will be tested in the Colonial Parkway murders?
Well, the truth is, Kathy, that DNA evidence has been tested in the Colonial Parkway murders. From what we understand, and this is from law enforcement to the Colonial Parkway murders families, we have potential, you have to underline that, potential offender DNA in 3 of the 4 crime scenes in the Colonial Parkway murders. So Thomas Dowski, Edward Knobling, and in Call Haley, there is some DNA evidence. Finally, in Phelps Lauer, incident number 4 on Interstate 64, that's the one where their bodies were found at the Hunt Club after being out in the weather for 6 weeks. To my knowledge, we don't appear to have any DNA evidence at this point. So DNA testing has been done. Here's the challenge, though. So far, nothing has proven to be a match. If you have DNA, remember, you have to be testing it against something. So, for example, they might upload it to the FBI CODIS database. If there's no match, that's where you are at that point. Now, have they chosen to do forensic genetic genealogy? That's a whole separate question. But there has been DNA testing. What the families in the Colonial Parkway murders are looking for is additional testing. Kathy Marie's question is a really good one. I recognize the answer isn't quite as simple as the question was.
This actually is a good follow-up to that from Sarah T. And Sarah asks, can you elaborate on whether law enforcement will do any DNA testing on any of the suspects from the 1986 to 1989 timeframe? And we'd like to remind you from last time, folks, that the long list is 150 people, and the short list is probably smaller than that. Bill, do we know if law enforcement has actually compared, here's our short list, here's our long list, and here's DNA, or are they not telling us?
They're mostly not telling us. Now, keep in mind, you've got 150 persons of interest, and this is just completely my guess. Let's say there's 10 or 15 people on the short list. We do have to be respectful, and law enforcement has to be respectful of the fact that no one is guilty of anything until they've been charged and then ultimately convicted in a court of law. People will kick around different suspects' names and ideas about how they might be involved in the Colonial Parkway murders, and I've done plenty of it, and Kristin has too. We can't be publicly accusing someone of being involved until law enforcement has identified someone as being a suspect and then ultimately has indicted them, charged them in a court of law. So again, the answer gets kind of nuanced. Mm-hmm. We do sometimes say publicly the names of some of the suspects who've passed on and offered what we might know about whether DNA testing has been done with any of those suspects. Beyond that, we're kind of restricted, even though we're civilians, There's a legal process here, and you can't just say, well, I think so-and-so is involved in the Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm going to state so publicly. I don't think that's a smart thing to do, and it's probably not an appropriate thing to do. Do we know for a fact that DNA testing has been done on people suspected of involvement? I don't know that we can say that publicly.
Robin C. also asks a similar question, although I don't know that we're going to be able to answer this one, unfortunately. Robin C. asks, how often does the FBI run the DNA found at any of the crime scenes against CODIS for any new hits? And I think it's a great question, and it's a valuable one, but I don't know that we know an answer, do we?
I don't think we do know an answer here.
I would love to know that. I think it would be a really interesting question to ask to our current agent and see whether they are able to speak to that or no.
I'm shaking my head because I know they're going to tell us they can't tell us.
Yes, it's a great question, Robin. And unfortunately, for a lot of the questions with relation to DNA, we do have to basically say, we would love to know that too, but we do not know. And the FBI just is not likely to share.
Or my alternative answer, which is, excuse me for a second while I go bang my head against the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing I will say, to my knowledge, in talking to FBI and forensics experts, I don't think these are automated processes. So in other words, I don't think it's a matter of it just happens once a week or once a month. I am aware of the fact that they have run DNA profiles in the Colonial Parkway murders against CODIS and perhaps other databases multiple times. But I don't think it's something that just happens in a routine manner or that's computerized where you hit a button and say, okay, every Monday morning we're going to run all of our available DNA profiles against the CODIS or state of Virginia DNA databases. I don't think it happens that way. I think it does require some action steps by the FBI or Virginia State Police to make it happen.
Now that you've mentioned that, I do kind of want to know what is stopping that from happening. What would it take theoretically, hypothetically, to the FBI analyst who I'm sure is listening to these podcasts to make sure we're not saying anything untoward? What hypothetically would need to happen to make it an automated process so that you could have, here's the DNA that we have in one file, here's the CODIS database in the other. Now let's automate it so that it runs every Monday morning or every Friday night so that we come back to work on Monday with brand new hits. I'm sure that's possible. We have the computing power. How can we make that happen?
I don't know. We're going to have to ask our colleagues, particularly former FBI folks, if they know the answer to this question, because I, for one, do not know the answer.
I think this next question is another one that we're going to have to say we don't know on, but let's go ahead and get it on the record anyway. Mandy G asks, are they, meaning the FBI and VSP, are they doing genetic genealogy searches on the DNA in this case yet? And if not, why not?
Mandy, this is a fantastic question. This is the question I feel like asking every single day. I'm not sure I know the answer. We have pushed hard and will continue to do so. We feel very strongly that this evidence should be tested and that we would like to see all of these open, unidentified DNA profiles that are available in the 3 crime scenes where we believe we have evidence. We think they should be doing forensic genetic genealogy. We're going to keep pushing on this. The FBI has established forensic genetic genealogy teams on the East Coast and the West Coast. The East Coast is out of the Baltimore field office. They've done some great work. The FBI has recently helped break cases, including the Gilgo Beach 4 Long Island serial killer cases, and they're hoping for more identification as a result of genetic genealogy in those cases. That work was done by the FBI together with Othram. Othram doing the lab work, the FBI doing the genealogy, I believe. The teams exist. We just want to get in the queue so that they're doing this work for the evidence in the Colonial Parkway murders as well.
And I think it's important to note at this point that literally every expert that we know who is in the DNA or the FGG field has offered carte blanche. We will do the testing in the Colonial Parkway murders case. We will do it for free. All that the FBI and the VSP need to do is give over the evidence. When the FBI said, we don't have the money for that, you don't need money for that. the FBI and the VSP, they have offered to do the work for free. All you need to do is be willing to give over the evidence. And that's the part that kind of ticks me off, is they don't seem to be willing to do that. And it's like, if you can't do anything with it, please give it to a lab that will.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird institutional foot dragging that's going on here that I find incredibly, incredibly frustrating. It seems like there's one excuse after another. We don't have the funding. Oh, when I say this lab, and this lab have all offered to test this evidence at no charge, they know how hard the Colonial Parkway murders families have worked to try to move this case forward. And I'm not saying that the FBI, Virginia State Police, and other agencies haven't also worked hard. But let's just take it that much further and see if we can put this thing over the goal line. If we could solve one of the Colonial Parkway murders, I would regard that as an incredible victory. And that might lead us in other directions in the other incidents. I just think the foot dragging and the institutional resistance and we prefer to do it in-house at our lab, where the queue is over a year long, for instance, at FBI Quantico. That's just ridiculous when we have state-of-the-art labs who've said to us, we'll test your evidence at no charge. We're going to see a bunch of these people, by the way, when we're at CrimeCon very soon.
Yep.
I can pretty much guarantee that when I see those folks, they're all going to be asking about the Colonial Parkway murders. How are things going in your sister's case? And everyone wants to help. Let's accept some of that help and just move forward. There's enough credit to go around. FBI, Virginia State Police, National Park Service Police, they've all done great work. Why don't we just push this thing over the goal line?
You know, and it does become a point, and again, I say this for the FBI analyst listening, you reach a point where if you keep coming up with excuses to turn down the help, it really does start to smack of cover up or conspiracy. And if you don't want that to continue, just accept the help. A ton of it is being offered, hands out, for free, from people who legitimately, really and truly care about this case and want to see it solved. Please, just accept the help. It's just unfathomable to me why they won't do it. It's one of those things, of the many things about this case that keep us up at night, that is the one I think that is most infuriating. That's the adjective I'll use. There are many more.
It's a family show. We have to keep it clean.
Yeah. The next question comes from Dora T. And Dora writes, I realize it's been an arduous journey. What do you believe it will take for the FBI to test remaining DNA in this case? Petitions, letters, billboards? Honestly, I cannot fathom this.
This is a hard one. I'm going to really have to think about this, Dora. It's something we do think about a lot. We have done letters. We've done billboards. I guess a petition's not out of the question. I don't know that I have a brilliant answer for this, but it's something I think we're going to have to continue to revisit and figure out. There are times when I sit here and I quietly think, what sequence of switches do we have to throw in order to get some movement, particularly with the FBI?
Yeah.
And it's a really tough thing to figure out. I've actually asked someone who shall remain nameless, but this is a person that worked at the DOJ for a number of years and knows these people and policies very well. And I asked this person, in their opinion, would the FBI ever not solve a case because it was politically embarrassing to them? And when you think about it, with the leaked crime scene photos and the discarded evidence and the missed opportunities in the Colonial Parkway murders, I understand that this case is probably a bit of an embarrassment to the FBI. But I asked the question, would they ever not solve a case that was politically embarrassing to them? Their answer, after very careful thought, we talked about this for over an hour, and I asked the question 2 different ways, once fairly close to the top of the conversation, and I revisited at the end of the conversation. Their reply was yes. And boy, that brought me up short.
There's your conspiracy. There's your cover-up, except it's not really a conspiracy.
Do institutional interests supersede case interests and the interest of justice?
It should not, but I fear that it does.
I have a real hard time accepting that. And that's why I revisited the question after an hour of discussion, I came back to it and asked the question in what I thought was a completely different way. And they said yes a second time. The second time around, they said, sadly, yes. They believed, even having worked with this organization, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for all those years, they believed that the FBI would fail to solve a case if it was politically embarrassing to the Bureau. And I think that's unacceptable.
As do I. Next question comes from Crystal T, who says, I would like an update on the hair that was found in Kathy's hand. I know it's a huge source of frustration for you two, but I have to ask. I thought it was out for testing over a year ago, if my memory serves me correctly.
Well, Crystal, I appreciate the question, even though I'm going to take a second here and go bang my head against the wall for a bit. They have done testing. The results have been inconclusive, and I can't seem to get any answer beyond that point. They just refuse to answer the question. I have suggested the use of outside labs, as Kristin was talking about a minute ago. There always seems to be this institutional resistance to using outside labs. The FBI always wants to use the Quantico lab, and the Virginia State Police always wants to use the Virginia State Lab, even at times when the science is more advanced at private labs. So I have asked the FBI repeatedly to consult with Astrea, one of the top hair labs in the country and one of the top DNA labs in California. And I just keep encountering resistance to this, even though Astrea is very interested in testing the hair in Kathy's hand and any other evidence in the Colonial Parkway murders. And I've spoken to the principal, Ed Green, and the number 2 person there, Kelly Harkins Kincaid, both of whom are amazing scientists. They are fully committed to helping the FBI in any way they can in that hair testing, and we just can't seem to get the FBI off the dime. And it's so frustrating because if the families control the evidence, we would have sent this out to the private labs. We would have found ways to raise the funds, cover the costs, and this work would have been done years ago. And yet, because we don't control the evidence, and the FBI and the Virginia State Police control the evidence, we can't seem to get them to move in the direction of using these private labs.
I definitely wish that there was a statute of limitations on, you have had this case long enough, now it's time to turn it over to someone else. I know that will never happen, but I really wish that there was a time limit upon which you can have a case in your possession and work on it until it's time for someone else to take over, give it some fresh eyes, give it new time, attention, and resources, and just take another crack at it. That rams up against the whole institutional image. I'm sure that for several institutions that would probably feel very embarrassing to turn over old, cold cases. But honestly, if the best interest of everyone is justice, if that's what we are all ostensibly aiming for at the end of the day, then at some point or another, someone is going to have to put the egos in check and say, in the interest of justice, in the interest of what is right, we do need to turn this over. We need to see if somebody else can make it happen. And again, that will never be something that the FBI or any other policing agency is interested in. But gosh, I wish there was such a thing. It goes back to that whole concept of accountability that I was ranting about last episode. I just wish that at some point or another, some of these law enforcement agencies would look and go, you know what, this is more than we can handle. Somebody else take it from here.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Well, you know what's going on is this institutional interests supersede investigative interests, I believe, in my heart of hearts.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Gilgo 4 Long Island serial killer case and the recent developments therein. A corrupt and incompetent law enforcement agency, and I'm not implying anything about the FBI or the Virginia State Police when I say this, had blocked the support of the FBI and other agencies who wanted to assist in the investigation into what was then called the Long Island serial killer and has now been kind of broken into the Gilgo Beach and Long Island serial killer cases. As I mentioned in our recent podcast episode with Robert Kolker discussing his book Lost Girls, it couldn't be lost on anyone that when a new group of investigators came into play, a new police chief, a new district attorney, a new task force, and this is key, involving county, New York State Police, FBI, and other agencies all working together, which should have happened years before in the Lisk case. They started a new task force in early 2022. 6 weeks after the task force was established, a New York State trooper, one of the people on the team, found a tip regarding a large, what they described as an ogre-like man, very tall, kind of oddly shaped guy, driving a very distinctive Chevrolet Avalanche truck, as being the last person seen with Lisk victim Amber Costello the night she disappeared. 6 weeks after that task force came together, this New York State trooper, one of the task force team members, discovered that tip had been sitting in the files for maybe as long as 12 years. In going back over the evidence, this trooper found that, put it forward to the team. They started looking at it, and everything came together, as Robert Kolker was telling us, very, very quickly. They then put the man under surveillance, and we're talking about Rex Heuermann at this point, and he checked so many boxes. He lived in Massapequa Park, which is the place that they felt that the killer most likely lived. He worked in Midtown Manhattan, right near where the cell phones had pinged when the killer was calling the sister of one of the victims. So many things made sense. He drove a Chevrolet Avalanche. He was 6'4" and kind of this big ogre-like guy. He checked so many boxes. And so they put this man under surveillance, and they quickly realized, here's our guy. Now, that tip was in the files for all of those years, but it took fresh eyes and fresh enthusiasm and a new team of people to put it all together. Good work, lots of good work had gone into that case, and they'd probably come close, but not quite close enough. And this is the kind of thing that was obviously tremendously embarrassing to James Burke and the highly corrupt and incompetent leadership of that previous investigative team. I mean, Burke actually ended up in jail, as did the district attorney, Thomas Spada. Well-deserved, I might add.
Yeah.
This idea of avoiding institutional embarrassment, I think, is one of the areas where we get tripped up. Kristin, what you were saying a moment ago, after X number of years, agencies should be compelled to allow other people, whether it's the families, other investigative agencies, what have you, to look into evidence and to review evidence. I think you're really going to have to push hard to overcome the institutional resistance, because can you imagine how embarrassing it would be if it was a situation like this Gilgo Beach case where Rex Heuermann is arrested? They had this evidence 10, 12 years ago. How embarrassing would it be for the FBI and the Virginia State Police if someone else took a look at this evidence and said, we ran this test and we've identified the person we believe may be your suspect? After
37 years.
Yeah, 37 years of failing to do so.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's an acceptable excuse, but I believe it is playing into the kind of institutional resistance we're seeing in the Colonial Parkway murders right now.
It makes sense. It really does. We've got a couple of other questions here, not related to DNA or FGG, but just some random things that were thrown out here by some listeners. And so I think to wrap up here, we're just going to take as many of these as we can. So one of our longtime listeners, Leova, asked the excellent question, if there is one thing you would change about law enforcement in the U.S., what would it be?
Wow.
I know. I saw the question. I was like, oh my God, where do I start?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
Jeez. Okay. But it says one thing. So You've already heard me go on a tangent about accountability and making sure that there is more oversight. I want more oversight into cold cases in particular, and I want them given proper attention and time and resources, and I want there to be a body, an overall body, I don't know what that would look like, that can say things like, okay, it's been 20 years on this case, time's up, move it to someone else. So if there's one thing that I would change about law enforcement in the US, it is a greater sense of accountability with a larger, not that we need more government in this example, but we do need a governing body of some variety. All right, Bill, how about you?
Okay. I'm going to try to articulate an idea I've had for a while that I think could be helpful and I think might help address Leoba's question about what we could change about law enforcement. This will take me a second to explain.
I know what this is. I know what it is. Go ahead.
It's something you and I have talked about before. I come from a military family. I come from a Navy family, as many listeners know. I think that as a country, we're spending too much money on our Defense Department. I think we should be putting more resources into law enforcement, and here's my idea. From my point of view, I think the fact that there are 250,000 cold case homicides here in the United States and growing, I've heard a new number that maybe
I heard
as high as
260 recently.
260, and I've even heard a number as high as 280,000. Let's go with 250 just to be fair or use round numbers. 250,000 cold case homicides, I think, should be a national scandal. Let's tie in those two comments I just made together. What if we were to take 100,000 of our best and brightest from America's military, many of whom might transition into law enforcement when they finished up their military careers as it is? What if we took 100,000 of our best and brightest from America's military and transferred them into positions around the country? They would apply, be like applying for a job, to take full-time paid positions based on need with law enforcement. And the goal would be to reduce America's 250,000 cold case homicides by 50% in 10 years. This is a little bit like when I was a kid, President Kennedy proposed that we go to the moon in 10 years. I'm doing this from memory, but something similar, like a 10-year period. You set yourself a goal, and it's a high bar, but you're trying to get there. I think we need to put 100,000 of our best and brightest distributed around the country based on need, and their focus would be on cold cases. So we'd have new investigators, forensics experts, additional scientists. There's a lot of amazing, incredibly dedicated people in America's military. They would make a fantastic addition to our law enforcement teams. And if we were to permanently fund these positions, so these are good jobs with good wages and benefits, and people would live in the cities and towns they want to live in. Some people would be returning back to places that they grew up in or know and love from their service, and we thank them for that service, and now we're going to put them into a new role. We could do amazing things if we took some of our military resources and put them into this idea of like a forensic moonshot or a cold case moonshot. But the idea that can we solve hundreds of thousands of these cases? Experts tell me it could be done, but as usual, time, attention, and resources.
Yes.
That's my idea. I'll climb off the soapbox now.
No, I've liked it every time you've mentioned it. I think it's a good idea. Nancy G presents a question that I don't know that I have the brainwave to deal with right now, but I'm going to give it my best shot anyway.
Okay.
Because it's a great question, but it's also the end of my workday and I'm tired. Nancy G asks, what is the biggest shift in the criminal justice field, including forensics, outside of DNA?
Oh, gosh.
Right? And she also continues, how do you feel DNA and FGG has influenced law enforcement and the district attorney's office? Whew. I don't know if I got it in me, man, but I will try.
Well, Nancy, I'm not an expert It's a great question. I guess I'd push back lightly. I think the biggest shift in the criminal justice field, from my point of view, and again, we're just following along. We're not criminal justice experts.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is really cool about hosting Mind Over Murder, and we're trying to do something worthwhile with our life experiences and losing loved ones, is the opportunity to talk to these amazing people and learn from them. We had Joe Giacalone on a couple of weeks ago talking about his work as a cold case detective, and he was talking about the Long Island serial killer case, which is a case that he has followed very closely. Even though he was an NYPD homicide detective and cold case specialist, he lived in Long Island, so he's followed that case for years. To talk with people like that, I think we can listen and learn. I think the biggest shift from my point of view is definitely in the forensics area. And DNA has just grown so tremendously. I think the biggest thing is actually the smallest, which is how little DNA is required to create a working, searchable DNA profile. Even in the last 5 years, it's grown tremendously because it's actually gotten so much more refined, and actually I'm holding my fingers together to make them very small. And then, of course, the forensic genetic genealogy, and many of our friends are working in this field now. It's so exciting to see. That highlights the ability that law enforcement have now to solve not just cold cases, but terrible cases that happened last week, where there's evidence left behind and you can grab that evidence, get it profiled, and start searching for who the identity is of that individual. So this can solve a murder or a rape that happened last week just as well as it could solve something that happened, say, 37 years ago in the Colonial Parkway murders. I hope my excitement and enthusiasm is coming across, because I think that's the single biggest change that I've seen as someone who is a fan of and is someone who is pulling for everyone's success. Private labs, public labs, local, state, county, and federal investigators, there's so much opportunity here. We just have to work together to figure out, how can we fund this? How can we make this work? How can we cut in half our backlog of 250,000 cold case homicides?
I agree. I have to say, for my own part, first as a spectator in the criminal justice field, and now doing what we do with the podcast and being around all of these very smart, very accomplished people, FGG, forensic genetic genealogy, has definitely felt like the biggest shift for me. And I remember when it actually is longer ago now than I would care to admit, after the Golden State Killer arrest and it was revealed how that happened, you could feel just a seismic shift. I mean, I remember thinking, my God, this is going to change everything. Mm-hmm. And then it was Othram and Parabon just breaking one cold case after another, after another, after another, after another. It was like, wow. Here we are. Look at these old cases. I mean, it felt like multi-decade cases were just falling one after the other. And of course, we were both sitting here going, all right, this is great. Like, when are we going to use it for our case? That's still, still a question I have.
Still waiting.
Still waiting. But I mean, it was insane. Just the number of every day or two. And because I'm on Othram's Facebook page and Instagram and everything else, we see it every single time David or Kristin Middleman is like, hey, we got a case announcement coming up. It's like, oh my God, dude, 5, 6 a week? This is nuts. They're really they're setting them up and knocking them down. I haven't been as excited about anything forensic related as I have been with FGG. Getting to talk to Colleen Fitzpatrick and Barbara Ray Venner about their work, that's really just encouraged me in that enthusiasm even more. They're doing phenomenal work.
Well said.
Let's see. Question from Julie C. This is interesting. As a team that seems to work well, I think emphasis on the seems there is interesting.
Oh, you're cynic, you. Come on.
As a team that seems to work well, what do you consider each other's strong suits and what do you separately bring to the table?
Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go first. I will say that I think that the greatest thing that Bill brings to the table is definitely his wizard-like ability to instantly connect with anyone and be the extrovert and the person who, like, I've never met a person that Bill can't instantly connect with and talk to. It's crazy. Like, I don't have that ability in any way, shape, or form because I'm too introverted for that. So Bill is definitely the guru when it comes to let me connect with you, let me find a connection between us, and it's amazing. I absolutely love just kind of like watching Bill work a room is hysterical because he's going to leave any room that he walks into with like 25 new friends, a bunch of business card and contact info for everybody. And I'm lucky that he's willing to be the extrovert because sometimes I'm too exhausted to do it. So I network very differently than Bill does. I love the fact that I've got one half of my podcasting team is team extrovert when I have to be team introvert. So I really appreciate that. And I love the fact that I get to work with somebody who is so warm and approachable.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, Julie.
He's having to think about it, folks.
No, Julie, I think it's a fantastic question. I can't say enough wonderful things about Kristin. Kristin is brilliant. She's an incredible writer. She's very, very funny. She's got a great spirit. She makes me laugh at times when things can get stressful, and we're dealing with situations that are sometimes a real struggle. She's an incredible partner. It's funny, I have to make a differentiation when I talk about Kristin because I always say podcast partner because we both have life partners.
Yes.
I always want to call Pamela my girlfriend, and she hates that expression. So I'm trying to be a good partner, and so I use the word partner. But I'll say partner or life partner. But Kristin is an incredible podcast partner, business partner.
Yep.
We work together very effectively. I was telling someone today that even though Kristin and I come at this work from completely different places, we actually very rarely disagree. I think it's healthy that that option exists.
Yeah.
And I'm dealing with someone who is passionate and smart and nuanced. And so I'm not always anticipating that Kristin's going to see things necessarily the way I do, but her response to something is going to be so well thought out and methodical and careful and then delivered with like this quiet wit that I can't help but laugh. But she really affects my thinking because she's coming at this and I'll think, wow, why didn't I think of that? But she did, and that's the important thing. So I can't say enough wonderful things about Kristin and what a pleasure it is to work with her every single day. I look forward to our conversations, and I am inspired by them every day.
Oh, thank you. See, you said it a whole lot better than I did. I'm the one who's supposed to have the words.
No, you did great, as usual.
Julie also asked too, she said, what do you separately bring to the table? And as you just pointed out a couple of minutes ago, like we do come at this from very different places. Yes, we both lost loved ones to violent crime, but it is a step back. I have never experienced the kind of immediate violence that you have with Kathy's loss. But I am able to come at it also as someone who is a fan. It sounds awful to say a fan of crime. I guess what I should say is a fan of like crime shows. Am I misrepresenting you if I say that you weren't really a fan of those things before we started working together? I'm not saying you are now either, but you weren't like, there for every CSI episode, right?
No, not at all. I would say it's something like Zodiac would come along every once in a while, the David Fincher film, and others that really grabbed me. But no, I wouldn't say I was a big true crime fan.
I came into it with this idea, like I came into the Colonial Parkway murders having seen and read about the fictional version through Patricia Cornwell long before I was really aware of it in any major way that I had done a ton of investigation into. So I would say separately, I really came into it as being like someone who I like CSI, I like Criminal Minds, all of that. That is something that I have brought into this relationship. And now I've really had to temper how I feel about these shows and how much I consume, because it is a lot and it's dark. And what we do, well, we do seem to have fun with it on the podcast, and we do. This is a very dark space to get into. Thank you all so much for your wonderful questions. And we do encourage you to just continue sending them, and we will get to them as we get them. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.